Dear learners, welcome to this course MSD016 Strategies and Models for Sustainability, which is one of the course of postgraduate diploma in sustainability science. In this session today, we are going to talk on community-based natural resource management. Natural resource management refers to the sustainable utilization of major natural resources such as land, water, air, minerals, forests, fisheries, and wild flora and fauna. And it's becoming increasingly important at all the scales, maybe of local, regional, national, and global, because of an increasing human population and its impact means increasing per capita use of resources in space. So we need to have a wise management system to manage a balance of natural resources. That's why we need to have a community participation in this natural resource management. When we realize the importance of this natural resource management, it is during the early phase of streamlining the natural resource management. The approach was in such a way that it was a centralized top-down approach, which about this we have already learned in the course 1 MSD011. Right. So due to these top-down approaches, means implementing without participation or without the understanding of the local people, community, then it has become a failure because of that centralized approach across the world. This led to the search for a viable and sustainable alternative approach by especially conservationists to achieve sustainable management. So in that approach, the approach is the way we have to follow that sustainable management of resources is we have to give local communities ownership rights to manage natural resources, and in that way it has become very common in the 1960s, this kind of approach of community-based natural resource management. And in fact, in the same way it was named as, since communities were given ownership and they were involved, and it was named since 1960s onward, it was named as community-based natural resource management. The aim of that community-based natural resource management is to create conditions under which most members of the community stood to benefit from the sustainable utilization and management of natural resources. In opposite to what we used to follow, that the top-down approach, this community-based natural resource management is a bottom-up participatory approach, and it has some basic principles that includes meeting the basic needs of local people, putting resources under local control rather than the control of the state government, then obtaining the equal delivery and that apportionment of socio-economic benefit and resources, and a commitment involving members of the community and the local institution in managing and conserving natural resources. These are some of the principles of community-based natural resource management. At the same time, this community-based natural resource management attempts to integrate the goals of conservation of natural resources, sustainable development, and participation of the community. So the success of community based natural resource management program, it depends on the structure of institution, socioeconomic development, and the scientific consideration behind that. How we have to view this community-based natural resource management? It is generally viewed as a mechanism to address both environment socioeconomic goals and to balance the exploitation and conservation of those valued ecosystem components. It also seeks to increase better resource management outcomes with the full participation of communities and resource users in decision-making activities and the incorporation of local institutions, customary practices, and knowledge systems in management, regulatory, and enforcement processes. At the same time, CBNRM, this community-based natural resource management, have dual objective of uplifting economic status of rural people and sustains the resources through this effective management of natural resource management, and it has now become an integral component of different rural development programs across the world. And in this era of climate change, it is being integrated within mitigation and adaptation programs against climate change. In addition to what we're talking about managing local natural resources, the CBNRM has a core value of transforming positively the relationship between the real people and the environment. So if you look at the status across the world, you will find out that most of the countries around the world, they have devolved the management of natural resources from the government to local groups, hoping to achieve long-term goals of sustainability. That means from top-down approach to effective bottom-up approach of natural resource management. And if you look back to how this concept of community-based natural resource management was involved, and very interestingly, that we'll find out in 1968 when Garrett Hardin, he calls Hardin, he published the Tragedy of Commons. That's one of his publication that talks about effective management of common natural resources. In that paper, Hardin discussed how humans can overuse and deplete common pool resources when there are no rules to restrict overuse. There you will find out when you talk about common pool resources here in the utilization of that common pool resources, individuals, they race to consume more than the others and create a vicious cycle of mismanagement, overconsumption that result in irreversible environmental degradation, because that common pool is belong to others and no one takes care about that. So at the same time, governments in many developing countries, governments were blamed for creating tragedy of commons. That kind of situation under a centralized top-down management system where local viewed natural resources as open access resources and try to maximize their benefits. Because that mindset comes to the local that okay, government, it is the responsibility of government to take care of about that. That's why they try to maximize their benefit irrespective of understanding the limitation of exploitation. As a result, environmental degradation was common in most of those developing countries. So the solution to the tragedy focus on how to involve local people in the management of those resources. In that way, community-based natural resource management was designed to overcome this tragedy of commons in rural communities in most of the developing countries. Since then, this framework of CBNRM has evolved in numerous branches. It spans on multiple disciplines like sociology, ecology, and so on. If you look into definition of community-based natural resource management in literature, you will find out a broad range of definition across different disciplines. But if you look into those definitions, you will find out that the core of those definitions is that The CBNRM seeks to support long-term sustainability with the participation of local people or resource users in the decision-making process or in the decision-making. So, this CBNRM is synonymous to, sometimes depending upon the situation you are using the term, it can be used as community-based management, community-based conservation, community-based environmental protection, community-based environmental planning organization, integrated conservation development program, incentive-based conservation and ecosystem management, and many more. And what are the characteristics, the basic general characteristic of community-based natural resource management? It is evident from different case study that the success of community-based natural resource management depends on the devolution of property rights over resources to the communities. Because communities are better positioned to manage and benefit if they have tenure over the resources. So stakeholders of community-based natural resource management include, individuals, groups of people, or institutions that involved in that. And on the other hand, we will find out another group of stakeholders that we can call them as secondary stakeholders. They include people who are interested in the project but are not directly affected by it. But they are able to influence those projects. Some examples are politicians, local government officials, non-governmental organizations, private sector business, research institutes, and academic institutions. So if you look into that, for effective implementations of community-based natural resource management, we have to aware or understand what are the key characteristics of community-based natural resource management. If you look into the key characteristics, we will find that CBNRM has clear and defined boundaries to prevent outsiders from capturing the resources, right? And is managed under local rules that specify when, how, what, and the level of technology to be used that are appropriate to local conditions. It also includes conflict resolution mechanism to resolve conflicts quickly and efficiently, and consists of a mixture of new management arrangements that can be applied to all the renewable natural resources. It is not an approach to manage natural resources only, but also relates to the benefit that are earned from their usage. It is also applicable where land is communally owned, means community owned land. So natural resources are being used, managed by communities rather than private landowners. At the same time, CBNRM expects improvement in the status of the resources, improvement in the livelihoods of the people who manage them, and overall promote sustainable use of natural resources for the benefits of the people. So it includes a range of specific approaches that we have developed over the last few decades. If you look into the organizing principle of effective community-based natural resource management, when you talk about a characteristic component, institutions play an important role in community-based natural resource management. So the organizational principles are there should be public participation and mobilization. Public has to be mobilized and there has to be participated. Social capital and collaborative partnership, resources and equity, communication and information dissemination, research and information development, devolution and empowerment, right? Then there should be public trust and legitimation, monitoring, regular monitoring, feedback and accountability of all the stakeholders, then adaptive leadership and co-management. Then there should be decision making of participatory in characteristic, means participatory decision making. Then there should be an enabling environment, that means optimal precondition or early condition of how to work together. So the resolution in cooperation means that conflict resolution and cooperation should be there. These are some of the principles. So if you look into the principle, you will find in this table that again these organization principles are well explained by some of the key characteristics of that community-based natural resource management. Here you will find in this table. So if you look into the first principle, public participation and mobilization. So effective public participation is key to all community-based natural resource management. So when we have effective public participation, it will empower citizens and increase their knowledge level. So participation will directly affect that trust by the public, confidence and legitimization of the process, and it's also provide participation of community members at all the steps of the program: information gathering, consultation, planning, decision making, implementation, evaluation. Again, if you look into the another principle of social capital and collaborative that partnership, when we talk about social that capital and collaborative partnership, then we should understand the network and partnerships, its importance in building up social capital. So in the same time, when we collaborate, it helps in leveraging resources and supporting implementation, and this collaboration again this give and learning opportunities through training, through workshop, and sharing one stakeholders, among sharing those knowledge among themselves, and it helps in building social capital and commitment. In the same way, when you talk about the principle of resource and equity, when we talk about natural resource management, environmental justice is one of the core values of natural resource management. So this CBNRM will improve local economy through this principle of resource and equity. It should improve the local economy. That includes provision for equitable and fair distribution of benefits, and conservation rural development is totally based on it, equity, local needs, and environmental sustainability. So when we talk about communication information dissemination under this principle, when we have effective communication system, it supports multiple social networks. On the other hand, different information knowledge system also enhance learning in the community. Then it makes the program transparent, and it helps in effective conveying expectation and limits. So when under the principle of resource and information development, the centralized information system should be accessible to all the members. In that, the decision when we give access to that, then all the decision will be based on a systematic way of information sharing, and that information should include when all the stakeholders, they should know or aware about the technicality of the project, the scientific validity of the project, and at the same time quality of life, the impact of quality of life between and after pre and during and the post implementation of that project. Then there will be economic valuation should be there, and then through that information gathering will be able to improve the new information. At the same time, when we talk about the principle of devolution and empowerment, then sharing power and responsibility between government and authorities means there should be power distribution among different groups, stakeholders of that project. Then public trust and legitimation the same way, that this will bring trust to the community, and then local leadership like elected member, they will help in building the trust and credibility. In the same time, when we are having monitoring having regular monitoring of the project and the feedback and accountability that will establish transparency, and then that will establish power sharing between different stakeholders and so on. So in the same way, when we have adaptive leadership and co-management, that will help in that help in to train the system, to train all the stakeholders and engage community members to perform major activities of the organization in sharing basis. The same way that participatory decision making, when we talk about participatory decision making, the participation of all the stakeholders, including scientists, policymakers, practitioners, and community members, will provide an opportunity for the sharing of knowledge and collaborative learning about the socio-ecological system in that area. And when we talk about the enabling environment, that is optimal precondition or early condition, it's a homogeneous structure and shared norms and the less disruptive cooperation exist there, and it should have consist a clear boundaries of people who are willing to participate, and they will be able to sustain. They should have that self-sustaining financially, self-sustaining in a monetary point of view or from an economic point of view. When we talk about conflict resolution cooperation, we know that whenever we are trying to have natural resource management project, sometimes we will have conflict among different groups that should be resolved, and cooperation should bring among the different stakeholders. Then if we look into the benefits of this community-based natural resource management, based on some of the successful CBNRM project, we have evidence that there are positive results in three major areas. One is, if you look from a natural point of view, ecological point of view, it gives us an effective environmental management. Then from your economic point of view, in terms of wealth, economic and revenue generation is happening in a positive way. In the same way, when we talk about power, then local empowerment, good governance, was one of the output of this community-based natural resource management. And if you look into, that the benefits from the point of devolution of natural resource management, there are two kinds of benefits. One is direct benefits, another is indirect benefits. When we talk about direct benefits, we will find that access to some subsistence commercial products, share of revenue from hunting, tourism concession, sales of timber, sales of valuable non-timber forest products, then share of income from the permit and license fees, employment generation, support for alternative livelihood activities, and a more productive resource base, that infrastructural development like schools, clinics, roads, etc. These are some of the direct benefits. If you look into the indirect benefit, then those indirect benefits are, then there will be organizational development, strengthening those organizations, new work alliance or coordination or a collaboration like with NGOs and between NGOs, among NGOs, that state agencies and non-government organizations. Then new channels of communication with government, technical and managerial capacity buildings happening, diversification of livelihood income, then livelihoods or income, and political empowerment, greater visibility, pride and identity. These are some of the indirect benefits. If we summarize that the benefits of CBNRM, some of them are the increased implementation and of and compliance with management decision and application of diverse knowledge sources to management, including both ecological knowledge and science at local level, improve the ground resource management, increase monitoring and adaptive management, decrease conflict over resources. That's we discuss when we talk about the principle also. Increase trust and strengthen relationship within the community, improve the livelihoods, greater community capacity and participation, improve environmental condition, more resilient system of socio-ecological system. So then when we look into the challenges that face in community-based natural resource management, in terms of scale, for example, when we talk about natural resources, they are especially in the wild areas. They have, for example, taken wild animals for conservation or resource management. They have a larger home range extending beyond the boundary of the community. This means that community must negotiate and collaborate with other communities and private landowners or the state. That's same applicable to when we talk about watershed management. And in terms of time, some natural resources like timber trees or wild elephants, take a long time to mature. So the benefits of management efforts that will take time to reach to the community. So we have to understand it. When you talk about another challenges on complexity or difficulties, the laws and the policies for managing natural resources are very complex and outdated sometimes. Even conflict arises with local values. In addition to that, communities are complex and diverse in needs and values. As a result, CBNRM program will benefit some groups whilst others may not. So these are some of the complications. And then when you talk about the implementation is a challenges, then that implementation of CBNR still depends on successful implementation of policy and legislation into action. Then again, if you look into the land tenure as a challenges, then most of the CBNR programs are designed to change ownership and control over natural resources to local community. However, in many countries, legislative changes to transfer land tenure to local groups are lacking. So these are some of the challenges. Again, when the unequal partnership is also one of the challenges. For example, when we in the process of implementing community-based CBNRM programs, communities have formed partnership with the private sector, government and NGOs. They are more concerned of this partnership. They are unequal with non-community groups. Most of the non-community groups, they are dominant the partners. So then again, one of the challenges, another challenge is traditional leadership. So when we implement that community-based natural resource management, it attempts to revitalize traditional leadership. It faces obstacles on how to best structure the new local institution. Then another is one of the most important is ecological status of resources. These community-based natural resource management programs are not an answer to complex and large environmental problems. It works best in environments that are relatively intact and provide opportunity for generating substantial financial incentives to change the way people perceive and manage their land and natural resources. So, how to address these challenges? To address such challenges of community-based natural resource management, what we have to do is that the program must include locally driven and tailor-made solutions to address local issues. In other words, the solution that works for one community will not always work for another. This is very much true. For example, countries like India, where diversity in any form, like land form diversity, social diversity is very high. So we have to understand this. So to avoid one-size-fits-all model, planners and community leaders should encourage participatory management process so that those different interests are represented and are part of the decision-making process. So today, what we'll have learned in this session is a brief about the concept of community-based natural resource management and what are its principles, what are its limitations and challenges. So with this, these are some of the few references where I depend for this presentation, and I encourage all of you to look into these references for further exploration in this, further understanding in this area, community-based natural resource management. Thank you very much.